Hey friends, welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. Today's show is going to be a Zoom interview that I recently recorded with Ed Earl. Ed owns Priority One Projects in Southern California, and he's also known as the Zen Builder, and we're going to talk more about what that means. He's a nationally known speaker and presents regularly to builders associations and at conferences, and like me, he's an owner's representative. I've been wanting to interview another owner's rep for a while now, so I'm super excited to bring you this interview. So without further delay, here's my interview with Ed Earl. Ed Earl, thank you so much for joining me today on the Your Project Shepherd podcast. Great to have you.
Well, it's great to be here, Curtis. Thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed meeting you at my presentation last year at Houston, and I'm excited to be on your show.
Yeah. So, like you said, we met a few months back. You were here in Houston speaking at a Builders Association event. And, afterwards we were able to chat and I got briefly to know about what you do. And at that time, I knew I wanted to have you on the podcast. So I'm super excited to have you here. That presentation that you did at the Builders Association presentation was the topic was Zen Building, and you're kind of known as the Zen Builder, which I think is a really interesting name, and there's a backstory there. So why don't you share with us what that's all about?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've actually been a practitioner of Zen Buddhism for about 20 years. I've studied under a Zen master named Thich Nhat Hanh, and he actually just passed away last year. And originally from Vietnam, and has monasteries all over the world, including one here in San Diego. And I was actually asked to be the owner's rep for the construction of a nunnery at the monastery. And so it was a very enlightening experience, right? Because usually my clients are, very wealthy individuals building estate homes or doing very complex multi-million-dollar remodels. And instead, my clients were, this group of very centered, very mindful monastics who really had a different view on the construction process and the project themselves. And all of that really helped me to really understand and gain a better perspective on the construction process. And I think it really comes down to the fact that the homeowner and the builder have such different perspectives and experiences and knowledge about the construction project. That's where I think most of the issues that arise in a construction project are due to those differences in perspectives. And by working with the monastics and Thich Nhat Hanh's organization really helped me to see that. And so really it was out of that process that I then became a public speaker. I was on the speech and debate team in college and did a bunch of speaking back then. But I thought when I went into construction that there really wouldn't be much of an opportunity for me to be a public speaker. But it was out of that experience that I had that I started giving presentations to various construction organizations about how to reduce conflict in the construction process, how to build trust, how to reduce the drama that often occurs. And so that's the topics that I speak on in my presentations, and was the subject of the presentation that you saw there at the Custom Builders organization in Houston there.
So what are the most common reasons that there is conflict in construction projects? What do you see the most often?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest component is the emotional component. And that's something that I think the builders often don't appreciate or understand, and even the homeowners don't. So I'm also a business coach, and I work with a couple of colleagues, one of which is David Luperger. And David Luperger has written this book called Managing the Emotional Homeowner. And I think it's such an informative piece, both for contractors as well as for homeowners. And in there, he has this chart where he tracks the emotions that a homeowner is going to experience during a home construction project. And I love that. I give it to all of my clients. Actually, I just had a new client last week, and I sent her that roller coaster chart. And she wrote back and said, okay, I'm going to fasten my seatbelt, And so that's the component. And it's the issue is that, the projects that we're working on are people's homes. And this is, for most people, their most valuable possession. And it's also their most important possession, right? It's where they raise their family, and it's where they call their home. It's their nest egg. And so for all of those reasons, every decision that they make in regards to either building a new home or remodeling their existing one has additional emotional weight because of that, right? And that's something that the homeowner often doesn't understand. God, I'm so stressed about these decisions. I don't know why. Well, it's very different than if you were making these decisions for something else, you know? And builders don't see it that way. They oftentimes can't appreciate that emotional side of it, right? For them, it's just a project. It's got to get done. It's got to get done on budget and on time. And they don't appreciate that emotional component. And they don't have the compassion to really understand what their clients are going through in making all of these decisions.
Yeah. For you and I, it's just another day at the office. We do multiple of these every single year.
Right.
And for them, this might be the only time in their life they do this, or maybe twice in their lifetime they might go through the process of building a home. So
Right.
yeah, emotions just run super high. And I think that you can prepare people. I had the same chart. I've seen it called different things. I've seen it called the emotional roller coaster or the funk chart, or different things. But and I love that chart. And I think that you can try to prepare people for that. But until you're in the middle of it, it's hard to understand. And sometimes people forget that you prepared them for that, right? So sometimes you have to refer back and say, hey, on this chart that I gave you, here's where we are now. So, this is expected. I kind of prepped you for this, right?
Yeah. And I think, another thing too, I think, HGTV and the home makeover shows have really kind of done a disservice for homeowners because they simplify the process, right? And they make it seem like it's so quick and so easy. And in reality, it's neither, right? It takes a lot of time and it's not that easy. And there's mistakes that are going to be made along the way, by both sides, by the builder and by the homeowner. And of course, they never dwell on those in that. But I know personally, we're in the design stages of doing a home remodel here. And we hired our design build firm 9 months ago, and we've totally changed our design a couple of times. And, for various reasons, but I understand this process, and I keep telling my wife, look, it's okay. This is part of it. We got to take, a long time to get it right in the design stages before we really start that construction. And we don't know what's going on. I mean, we were looking at ideas last night. She had a great idea, really. She got onto Zillow and she looked at other homes in our neighborhood, right, that were built by the same builder. And she went into their sales listings and, oh, look at they took a wall out here, or they added this. Look where they moved their refrigerator. And so we got a lot of really great ideas from that. And that's, I think, the process, the planning process, and the amount of time that it takes. That's another thing that I really emphasize with my homeowner clients as well, is to be patient, take time. Originally, our project was going to be, part of it was going to be a granny flat for my mother, who my father just passed away recently, and she was going to move in with us. So I was like, we got to get this done. We got to get it done. Mom's got to move in with us. Well, now we've changed that. And actually, Mom's moved into a senior living community. And that's, kind of removed that time deadline that we had. And I feel like the design process is going to go so much better because we don't have that deadline anymore.
Yeah, it's always interesting to be in the process as on the other side. We've done the same thing. We did our kitchen and a couple of rooms in our home, and being on the flip side of that is always an eye-opening experience, and it actually helps you to understand what the customer's going through.
Mm-hmm. It does.
So one of the things that you and I both do that we have in common is we're both owners representatives. So your company, Priority One Projects, I think that you actually call it a project manager, but project manager, owners representative, kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So for our viewers and listeners who don't know what an owner's rep is or does, why don't you give us a brief explanation?
Sure, I will. And the reason I use project manager is because people don't know what an owner's rep is. Most people don't. I started on the commercial side of construction, and owner's reps are very common in the commercial side, but on the residential side, not so much. I think they're as important, if not more important, on the residential side. But so the kind of my elevator pitch of the way I describe what I do is that I'm a professional advisor hired by homeowners that are either building a custom home or doing a high-end remodel. And I help them assemble their team, select their architect, their builder, their interior designer, and put that team together. And then I communicate, coordinate, and integrate between all of the people involved in the construction process on that team to help to smooth out that construction process and, have the objective of bringing it in on budget and on time. But more important than that, I feel, is to really reduce the stress level and to make sure that the client really gets what they want, because I think that's really those two objectives of reducing the stress and them getting really what they want are more important than bringing it in on budget and on time.
Right. That's a great explanation. I like to say that, everybody that's involved in the process, the architect, the builder, the interior designer, everyone kind of has their own agenda, even if they're great partners, and the people that we work with are great partners. But at the end of the day, really everybody is watching out for themselves. They have their own agenda. Maybe the architect or designer, their agenda is they want to get it in a magazine, or they want to, make sure that their design aesthetic is kept to. And the builder is understandably concerned about his bottom line, and he wants something that he can put on his website, right? So everyone kind of has their own agenda, and somebody has to be the one that's there that's looking out for the homeowner, especially if it's somebody that hasn't been through the process. And again, most people haven't, or somebody that's just really busy that doesn't have the time to be really engaged in the project, or they just don't have that level of knowledge. So I like to say that we stand in place for the homeowner and the project, and we become them for purposes of the project. So oftentimes we're the only one who is really beholden to the homeowner, or the only one that's really watching out for them, right?
That's a great point. And that's exactly right, Curtis. Yeah, everyone does have their own interests, and for good reason, and they're not always in alignment with the homeowner. And so the homeowner really needs that advocate, that owner's rep, to be the one person in that room, in those roundtable discussions that's looking out for the homeowner's best interest.
Yeah, I think people tend to say, well, if I hire a good builder, why do I need an owner's rep?
Yeah, right.
And I mean, that's a great argument too. And you know what? Not every project needs it. If it's a smaller build, or maybe below a certain threshold, maybe it's not a necessary expense. The bigger, the more complex the project is, I think the more it's necessary. Or even on smaller projects, if it's just something that you don't have time to be involved in personally, right? Maybe you own a business, or you're just busy with work, or you have a lot of family commitments, and you don't have the time to put into being on the site or kind of communicating with all the parties that have to be communicated with. That's when you need an owner's rep.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. But I've done some, fairly small projects for some very, busy, successful people. And, but they look at how much their time's worth, and they go, well, look, Ed, I'd much rather pay you, for every hour that I pay you, you're saving me 2 hours. So I'm ahead of the game. And so, yeah, I've done, even just a kitchen remodel before for someone that really gets that and understands, yeah, hey, I'm super busy. I just want someone to take care of all this stuff for me. So,
well, and I'm not sure about you, but like we offer even hourly services. So if it's a project where somebody doesn't feel like they need us or want us engaged on the whole thing, we can even offer kind of some key checkpoints. So maybe before contract, we're like reviewing some specifications and documents, and during construction, we have kind of key quality assurance checkpoints that we're going to come by the job site, do a walkthrough, check out the plans, and so it's kind of a reduced service, but we're still there checking it at key points to make sure that your interests are being looked out for. So that's something that I offer. I'm not sure if you do the same thing.
Yeah, I actually charge an hourly for all of my services. I just realized that every project is so different, and it was just really hard to kind of know in advance and be able to price my services. And also, if you charge kind of a percentage of the total cost, then, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. I mean, sometimes I will recommend to my clients, I think you should build that guest house. Knowing what I know about you and everything else, I think you're going to regret it if you don't do it now. And, if in the back of the mind it goes, well, yeah, of course, because he's getting, X percentage of that. That's why he's telling us to build that. So, but yeah, I do everything on an hourly basis. And yeah, I have one client right now who is building a custom home, but he's super hands-on. He literally lives like 2 blocks away. He's at the job site every day. And we get together once or twice a month for a job site meeting just to kind of touch bases on things. And, it's whatever, 6 hours a month kind of thing. It's a very nominal amount of engagement. And then, I've got other projects where I'm there almost every day. And I just do whatever the client asked me to do. I had one client want me to go out and help them pick their audio equipment. So, we were going to like audio showrooms and picking up, all of their equipment. So it just depends.
Well, so this season of our podcast, we're talking about, what do things cost? So that's a great segue into that topic. So you mentioned that you charge hourly, as do I. And what we do, and you probably do something similar, is we'll kind of take a retainer like an attorney might for a block of hours. So we'll bill for 20 hours, 40 hours, depending on the size of the project. We'll bill that block of hours, and then as we use the hours, we'll track those in our time clock software. And then once those are used up, we'll bill for another block of hours. And as we approach the end of the project, that might be reduced if there's just a little bit of work left or whatever. But we're kind of just billing in retainer blocks. And so as far as what does it cost, it does add a reasonable expense to the project. But again, that can be tailored to what you need us to do. Anyway, do you do kind of the similar thing in billing?
Yeah, very similar. I take a retainer at the beginning, and then I bill hourly. I don't bill in retainer increments. I actually just bill hourly, and then I apply the retainer towards the last. But I think, to the point about cost, I think you have to define what you mean by cost. And I think it's really important that you look at it not just from a monetary cost, but you have to look at the overall cost. And I think the other non-monetary components of cost are really, for most of my clients, the more important and the more valuable. Things like their time, their stress level, their ability to focus on other items. I think all of those are really the most important thing. And so if you look at, whatever fee they pay me monetarily and compare that to what I've saved them in terms of time and stress and allowing them to focus on their personal and professional lives and all of that stuff, it more than offsets whatever they pay me monetarily.
Absolutely. And 2 or 3 episodes now ago on the podcast, we had an attorney on, and we were talking about kind of the cost of when these things go south, the cost of litigation and all that kind of stuff too. So, if things were to get to that point, it's a whole nother world of stress in your life and heartache that by having an owner's rep involved, hopefully you can head off that, if things never get to that point, because we're here watching out for you during that process. Because a lot of those, those problems that people have with their projects are, unrealistic expectations, poorly defined scopes of work, just kind of a lack of clarity, a lack of communication. And so those are all kind of the things that we really focus on. Hey, what is the scope of work? What is the specification? What are we doing here exactly? And then making sure that you're getting that. We're holding the builder, the subcontractors accountable for producing what they've committed to provide to you. So, by having us making sure that happens, hopefully it never gets to that point
Right.
of the heartache of having to go the litigation route in a project.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. I think another thing too that's really important, that and a role that I play, is putting that team together from the very beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the old model, I call it the military approach to construction, where they hire an architect, they design the plans, then they go out and get three bids from three different general contractors, and the architect gives the plans to the contractor, and the contractor gives the marching orders to the subs, and it's this kind of top down situation, where what I really like to do is to build that team from the very beginning, right? So maybe you start with the architect, but within the same month, you're also having discussions and hiring your builder at the same time. So you have your architect, your builder, your interior designer, me as the owner's rep, all together as a team from the very beginning. And so from the very beginning, we're designing to a budget, and not just where if an architect has no budget, they just design to a concept. And invariably, I'm sure, Curtis, as you know, most projects that are designed by architects without any input from the rest of the team end up costing way more than what the client expected or can afford.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's the best way to approach it. That's something that we've talked about many times on this podcast, is building that team from the very beginning. And so it's, I think, unusual for people to think of hiring an owner's rep who's then going to choose the team. And we're not going to choose the team blindly. We're still going to involve our client in that process. But like here in Houston, I know most of the architects in town. I know most
Right.
of the good builders in town are kind of in my network. So I'm sure it's the same in Southern California where you're at. And so, we kind of know those personalities, and we know, hey, this is probably the right guy for this project, maybe based on personality, or maybe based on he's done this type of project before. But we kind of have that knowledge of what's in the marketplace to help you make a good decision to put your team together, right?
Right. Exactly. Yep. That's very true. And then I think too, because of, your reputation and connections in Houston, mine in Southern California, it also raises the level of accountability to the project, right? Because if the homeowner just goes and hires the builder, and the builder doesn't end up doing a good job, well, then he's not going to get any recommendations from that homeowner, obviously. But if he messes up when he's working with you or with me, he knows that, we're frequently recommending builders and talking to lots of people in the industry. So he's, got more of an incentive to really perform than if he was just working individually for just one homeowner.
Exactly. So what are some, we talked, I think in the presentation that you did at the HBA, one of the things that you talked about was what types of clients are kind of the, I hate to use the word nightmare clients on something here focused to homeowners, but kind of what types of people tend to have the hardest time in a construction environment? Maybe what kind of people shouldn't go through this process?
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's a good way to put it. And that is, I call them difficult clients, but it's not only that they're difficult to work with, but they have a difficult time in working through a construction project. And number one on my list is engineers. There's lots of different people that you could argue, but engineers, I think, are really a unique breed. My son's an engineer, so I know firsthand.
My wife's an engineer.
Yeah. And the thing with engineers is, they're super precise thinkers, and they think very rationally and logically, and they want everything to kind of be causally related, right? So this happens, and then this, and then this. And the thing is that in a construction project, it doesn't work that way. There's lots of uncertainties and unpredictable things in a construction project. And those things are harder for engineers to understand and to deal with. I think another thing too is that, engineers are used to kind of having a lot of knowledge, or being able to get the knowledge and figure things out. I tell the story, as Ed did in that presentation that you saw, where I saw this guy walk by and I was like, yeah, I could just tell he was an engineer. And then I said, well, it was because he was wearing this shirt, right? And the shirt says, of course I know I'm right. I'm an engineer, you know? So that's the way it is with engineers. And I think too, even if engineers, oftentimes they're in construction, right? They might be a structural engineer or, mechanical engineer. And so they go, oh, well, I'm in construction. I understand that. But oftentimes they're engineers in commercial construction. And it goes back to what I said earlier about the emotional component. So they're not used to dealing with the emotional component of a construction project. I show this picture of an engineer designing a bridge, and I say, yeah, sure, it's easy for him to design this bridge. But imagine if he had to work with his wife and decide what color he had to paint the bridge. That would be a different story, right? So so that's why I think engineers are difficult. Another thing that was actually brought up to me when I gave this presentation to a NARI group in Minneapolis a few years back, one guy raised his hand. He said, I've had this engineer client. And he said, the problem is that if you think about what engineers do for a living, they're always re-engineering things, right? They're always trying to make things better. They're always trying to re-engineer things. And he did the same thing with my project. He was always changing things. He said, I had so many change orders from this engineer because he was always, oh, I thought of this, let's do that. And so I think that can be another big factor. The last one, I think, when dealing with engineers is for them to really understand and appreciate, and I always tell my builders to explain their projects this way, that they really are building a prototype. And that, I think, really helps an engineer to understand the uncertainties and unpredictability in a residential construction project. Let's say they've hired a builder to kitchen remodeler to remodel their kitchen. And they go, well, God, this guy's done 100 kitchens before. This isn't a prototype. Well, it actually is, because he's never built this exact kitchen before. Maybe even if he's done your neighbor that's got the same, model in the track that he's redone this kitchen, but he's never worked with you before. So that's what really makes it a prototype. And also the fact that, in construction, it's not like a cell phone, right? Where, Apple puts up an iOS and there's all these bugs in it. And then they fix all the bugs and then they push up a new one, a few days later. A construction project, you can't do that, right? You have one chance to get it right. And that really changes it as well. And that's what also makes it a component of being a prototype. So for all of those reasons, that's why I put engineers at the top of my list for difficult clients. So,
yeah, and here in our market, we deal with a lot of engineers, big oil and gas market. So we get a lot of petroleum engineers, chemical engineers, all that kind of thing, and they're not involved in residential construction at all, but it's the same mentality. I think in those situations, whether you were an engineer watching this or whether you're a builder watching this, I think that it's a great example of why having an owner's rep in the middle of you is a great thing. We're not going to stop engineers from wanting to build houses, nor should we. We're not going to stop builders from having engineers as clients. But I think both parties can greatly benefit from having an owner's rep. It's kind of a middleman to manage the emotions of the process and just help set expectations. I wish many times in the past when I had engineer clients that I kind of had somebody in the middle there to kind of set the tone for both parties. I think on your list, the other one that you had that was a kind of a common problem client was attorneys, right?
Yes.
I've actually always had good experiences with attorneys, and maybe I've just been lucky. I think that most of the attorneys that I've worked with have kind of had the attitude of, if something goes wrong, I'll just sue you.
Right.
The attorneys tend to read their contract even less than anyone. The attorney reads the contract way less than an engineer does. Right,
exactly. Yeah, that's true. A great attorney story I had when I was giving the presentation one time. This builder came up to me afterwards. He said, I had this great story. He said, I had my attorney draft my construction contract, right? And he said, a few years later, he contacted me and wanted me to do a remodel for him. So, I filled my contract out and gave it to him. And he comes back to me. He's like, well, I'm not going to sign this thing. I've got some clauses in here I have problems with. And the builder's like, you wrote the darn thing. Come on, what do you mean? So that's funny. I think another thing too, and I talk about this kind of a humorous part of my presentation, is about the fact that there's this stereotype of residential builders as being dishonest, right? And
Yeah.
so that's a myth that has really been propagated in television shows and television commercials. And I play a couple of commercials and talk about these TV shows. And while it's really more of I think a myth, and I call it that, but it's a reality for many people, right? Because they see these stories about these ripoff contractors, and so they have this inherent mistrust of the construction industry. And if you think about what an attorney is paid to do, they're paid to not trust people, to go, okay, well, what would happen if something goes wrong? So I think in one way they have that kind of subconscious conversation in the back of their mind, because they're, probably it's just a part of our culture, is that, the dishonest contractor. And so I think it then makes it harder for attorneys to develop that trust. And that's another thing I say in my presentation, right? That as a business coach to contractors, I'll ask my contractor coaching clients, what's the first and most important thing that you need to build in your construction project? And I'll say, it's not the foundation or the framing, it's trust. And trust is really the key to every construction project. Until you have built a level of trust with your client, you're not going to have a successful construction project. And I think that trust component is another big issue for attorney clients as well.
Yeah. I mean, there are very few, I don't want to say any, but there are very few contractors out there who go into a project saying, I'm going to screw somebody, or this is going to go badly. I think everyone, for the most part, goes into the project wanting a successful project. Things tend to go off the rails when when trust is lost and not regained, or when expectations aren't met. So, I'm not sure if you do this, but I get hired here to kind of help work with troubled projects to get them back on track. Unfortunately, people don't think they need an owner's rep until they do,
Right.
and then it's too late sometimes. I got a call the other day, last week, to help with a project that's already in litigation. I said, it's too late. You're already way past that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, again, that's a great reason to hire an owner's rep early in the process. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until it's off the rails, because we can only do so much once trust is lost. It's really hard to regain. Sometimes we are able to kind of get the parties back together. If the project's close to being finished, we can kind of, get the parties separated, kind of, and get things done and kind of off the books. But it's way better if we can be involved in the very beginning.
Absolutely. Yep. I feel the same way, Curtis. I won't take on, projects that are already in litigation, because like you said, it's just too far gone. And ideally, I love to be brought in at the beginning and be able to build that team that I talked about earlier. But unfortunately, probably half of my jobs I've brought in after that. And I have a job right now that I'm doing where, my client, hired an architect who kind of drew this great design, and then couldn't make it happen. And then, hired a second one, and then hired a builder. And by the time he brought me in, the builder had already been at it for almost a year, and still with kind of no idea of when this thing was going to be completed or how much what was going to cost. And so I was able to come in and help to add some structure and organization to it. And I'm a big proponent of cloud-based construction project management systems, and have been for years. And I always talk about them in my presentations. But this is a perfect example where this was a kind of an old school builder. He wasn't using a cloud-based system, really he didn't have a schedule. He had no schedule. And so I, went in and we brought in Builder Trend and, put a project schedule together and a budget. And so now we have some documentation and accountability there, and we're doing much better and making progress with the project.
Yep. And even if the builder has Builder Trend, Co-Construct, a cloud-based software, oftentimes, well, most of the time, not everyone is using it. The builder's using it, but you still got
Right.
you still got the architect and the designer and the engineer and the homeowner who may not be buying into that as well. So, sometimes we separate from the builder, if he has his software, sometimes we're even setting up our own
Hmm.
project schedule that's kind of a little bit higher level than just the build schedule, to help manage and to get buy-in from all the parties, to make sure that everyone's kind of seeing that, uh, or just a tool that we can use to manage it if the builder is maybe not doing his the right way or staying on top of it. So,
Right.
well, I think that's about all I have today, Ed. I really appreciate you being with us. It's been fantastic. Like I said, ever since I met you, I wanted to have you on, and you're the first owner's rep that I've had as a guest on the podcast, and that's something that I've been looking forward to ever since we started. Because really, this whole podcast, ever since I started, was kind of building to the point of you really need an owner's rep. And so it's great to have you on and have your explanation of what you do, and I hope that helps people understand what our role in this in their project can be.
Exactly, Curtis. And I really appreciate what you're doing, because I think that's the biggest challenge that we face as owners reps, is that people don't know we exist. They don't understand the need that they have for that. And so I think that your podcast is really doing a great job of educating our potential clients and homeowners about the importance of having an owner's rep, and how much that we can do to really be able to save, not just money, but more importantly, time and stress and everything else that it takes to undertake a residential construction project.
Yep. Well, thanks again, Ed, and thank you everybody for watching this episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. And just remember that every project has to be built like this simple child's drawing of a house that you'll see here on the screen. The foundation is proper planning. The left wall is your team. The right wall is communication. And the roof protecting it all is proper execution. Have all four of those components in place, and your project will be solid. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.